Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our February Science Cafe at the National Museum of Health and Medicine. It's in Silver Spring, Maryland, as you know. Tonight's program, called Vietnam War Medicine, a look at the Medical Museum's Second Surgical Hospital, is being taped for later broadcast through our social media channels. I'm really pleased tonight to have all of you here. I think this is it's a topic that we wanted to cover because we have been so interested in seeing things come into our museum related to Vietnam, especially with the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam in our midst. And so we wanted to make sure that we, as a commemorative partner with the Vietnam War Commemoration Group, could offer some educational programs so that we could help complement this nationwide initiative to educate the public about those who served in Vietnam and what we've really learned from that experience. So tonight we have two guests with us who are going to make presentations. The first one is going to be a short talk about the Vietnam War commemoration. And I'd like to introduce you to retired Lucretia McClenny. Lucretia McClenny served as a U.S. Army Nurse Corps officer for 30 years. Part of that time, as I understand it, was actually spent across the street at Forest Glen. She was a psychiatric nurse and worked with some of our patients from Walter Reed. So she actually was a neighbor for a while. She, after her retirement, discovered her passion for veterans. And for 10 years, she worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs and has now entered her third career as a consultant for the Vietnam War commemoration. So without further ado, I'd like for Colonel Retired McClenny to come up and address you about the Vietnam commemoration. Thank you so much for being here. And I'd also like to recognize Staff Sergeant Hartman, who is with us. He is a permanent part of this organization, and he's going to help us along, and we're really thrilled he could be here with the presentation out in the lobby. So after we're finished this evening, I would invite people to go out, pick up stickers, pick up pins, and learn more about this organization. It may be something that you'd like to be a part of as well.
Good evening. We're going to try that again. The nurses need to know the audience at least has a pulse before we start talking to you, okay? Work with me now. Good evening.
Good evening.
That's better. We have a wonderful crowd tonight. My colleague, Staff Sergeant Hartman, and I were honored to be here this evening. And I want to thank Andrea for the invitation to participate in tonight's Science Cafe. This certainly is a subject that's certainly near and dear to my heart. You know, I stand here before you, a very proud veteran, but an equally proud daughter of a Vietnam veteran who served 2 tours in Vietnam. But unlike the million of Vietnam veterans, and perhaps those of you who are here, I know there's a few Vietnam veterans here in this audience, my dad and you came home to less than a hero's welcome. There were no Wounded Warrior programs, there were no yellow ribbons tied around old oak trees waiting for your return, or bands playing when you got off the plane. There was no one saying thank you for your service. That's what this commemoration is all about, and I would make this disclaimer right up front. For me, it's personal. I do this in honor of my father, like I needed a third career, but my love is helping veterans. And I truly found that when I was at VA. I learned more about the VA, the 10 years I was blessed to serve as a part of that team, than I ever did the 30 years I was in uniform. People think the VA is a home loan and the GI Bill. I can tell you it's much more than that in terms of restoring quality of life to our nation's veterans. And I was truly honored to have served the 10 years that I was there. And I'm equally honored to be a part of the commemoration. And it's an honor for me to be a part of a grateful nation to say thank you for your service. I have 3 objectives this evening. One is to tell you about the commemoration. Secondly is I got to get a sales pitch in. For those of you who belong to organizations who are not commemorative partners, I'm going to highly encourage you, whether it's a church, university, school, anyone can become a commemorative partner. So I got to get my sales pitch in. And I'm already talked to Dr. Rich about getting U-Shoes to become a commemorative partner. And lastly, my colleague and I would like to present the Vietnam lapel pin to those of you who are Vietnam veterans or perhaps served during the Vietnam era. Give us the honor of presenting you tonight with the Vietnam lapel pin. So with that, we'll begin with a video entitled A Moment of Truth. Please.
Can I help you?
Just a cup of coffee, please.
Coming right up. Oh, there's no charge.
Thank you.
Here you go.
Thanks again.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support.
Can I take a picture?
Sure.
All right, smile. There you go.
Sir, my son would like to ask you a question.
Are you a hero too? That man said you were.
I just served as best I could.
Can we take a picture?
Sure.
All right, smile big. Be safe.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support.
Can I get you a refill?
In 2008, Congress enacted legislation that authorized the Department of Defense to put together programs that would commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. There are 5 congressional objectives. The first is obviously to thank, honor, and recognize the service of our Vietnam veterans, of those who were held as POWs or listed as MIA, and also what's most important, I think, about this commemoration is to also recognize the sacrifice of the families. Secondly, is to highlight the services of the armed forces and those governmental agencies, both federal and non-federal, who provided support to our armed forces. Third, to highlight those of you who are back here on the home front, providing support to our armed services. Fourth, to highlight the advancements in medical, science, technology. And lastly, to recognize the contributions of our allies. Next slide, please. The focus of the commemoration is on the Vietnam veterans. And when we have these events, it's to recognize not only the Vietnam veterans, but recognize all who served in past wars. Next slide. There will be commemorations throughout the U.S. and as well as international, but we want this to be hometown-centric, here in Silver Spring, Maryland, like what the museum is doing here this evening, and I'm proud to say they are a commemorative partner. We could not do this without our commemorative partners. We have about a couple dozen folks in our office, but we're here tonight in support of what our commemorative partner, the museum, is doing of all of you here. I can't say thank you enough for the great turnout we have this evening. So thank you for being here. But we want these events to occur where the veterans live and work, whether it's Alexandria, Virginia, Kansas City, Missouri, but where the veterans are in their hometown. And our commemorative partners help us do this together. Next slide. This will last till 2025. There are 3 phases. We're currently in the execution phase. Our commemorative partners, who are civilian partners, were asked to do 2 events per year that commemorate the service, that thank and honor those Vietnam veterans, as well as recognize the sacrifice of the families who may have lost loved ones during Vietnam. Those military organizations are asked to do 1 event per year, and our office provides a host of resources. What you see out there on the table, we provide that. You got to give us more than 24 hours notice, but we'll come out and set things up for you. We'll mail them to you. We also have a whole speakers bureau, folks that come out and talk to you about the program. And the pins we're going to give tonight, those are all things that are provided by our office, so you're not in this alone. Next slide, please. The actual commemoration kicked off on Memorial Day 2012. We have a video clip that depicts that with our president, who's actually at the wall.
And one of the most painful chapters in our history was Vietnam. Most particularly how we treated our troops who served there. You are often blamed for a war you didn't start, when you should have been commended for serving your country with valor. You're sometimes blamed for misdeeds of a few. When the honorable service of the many should have been praised, you came home and sometimes were denigrated when you should have been celebrated. It was a national shame, a disgrace that should have never happened. And that's why here today we resolve that it will not happen again.
Here comes my sales pitch. How do you become a commemorative partner? It's easy. The website is here on the screen. You go to the website, there's a one-page application, and there's also a statement of understanding that we ask you to sign. If you're a civilian organization, we're asking you to do 2 events per year that recognize, thank, and honor our Vietnam veterans, and also the sacrifices of the families who may have lost loved ones who were either killed in Vietnam, held POW, or listed as MIA. Once you're approved as a commemorative partner, it takes about 30 days. It's a relatively quick process. You're issued a starter kit, and in that starter kit you get the Presidential Proclamation, which is suitable for framing. You get a certificate that's signed by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense. You also get the seal and get the presidential flag. Not the presidential flag, I'm sorry, the Vietnam flag. You'll see there's a picture of it at the end of the presentation. But you get that, and also you get a password that allows you access to the Commemorative Partner web portal. And on that portal, you can find out what other commemorative partners, like the museum, like you all posted this on the portal, correct? And after the event, we asked you to go on the portal and tell us how was the event, lessons learned, what worked well, what didn't work. So that way, as you become a commemorative partner, you can find out, hey, what are other people doing? You don't have to be, anyone can be a commemorative partner. I've got a slide that shows you the list of those individuals who are commemorative partners. And again, you can request support, whether you want materials, whether you want a speaker. Our office is there to support you. And also, you have a whole host, there are over 7,000 commemorative partners. Let's go to the next slide. This is current as of today. 7,293 commemorative partners. I think you'll see your logo up there. Okay. We want to see your logo up there. We want to see You Shoes' logo up there. Dr. Rich, that's your mission, okay, sir? I'm tasking you. Get You Shoes to become a commemorative partner. We have over 7,000. We could not do this without our commemorative partners. They are a force multiplier in this commemoration. As I said, there are a couple dozen of us in the office, but we're here to support you, make this happen. But it's the commemorative partners who are in Silver Spring, Maryland, or Alexandria, Virginia, who are doing these hometown events to recognize the veterans who live and work in your community. Next slide, please. This kind of gives you the breakout of commemorative partners. It can be anyone. We have Boy Scouts who are commemorative partners, Girl Scouts, universities, schools, churches. So your church can become a commemorative partner. Anyone can become a commemorative partner. You just have to go on the website, fill out the application, and sign the statement of understanding and agree to do 2 events per year if you're a civilian organization, or if you're a military organization, that's 1 event per year. And again, our office is there as a resource to help you. And also you have 7,293 other partners to help you as well. Next slide. This is a quote from General Fred Wayne. You take a look at this. Can you see that in the back? Next quote. Both of these were from Vietnam veterans, Colonel Nahas. We had no expectations but to serve where duty called us. We asked for no reward except the nation's thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what this commemoration is all about. It's a grateful nation saying thank you for your service and recognizing the sacrifices of the families who lost loved ones during Vietnam. We have one more video clip. It's done by, you recognize the voice, that of Sam Elliott.
Nine million Americans served during the period of the Vietnam War. They represented 10% of their generation. 6 million of them were volunteers. They were the oldest and best educated force America ever sent into harm's way. 97% would be honorably discharged. And today, the vast majority of them testify with their actions and their words that they are proud of their service and would serve again if called. November 14th, 1965, 10:48 a.m. Elements of the 7th Cavalry touched down at Landing Zone X-Ray. Within 30 minutes, the Battle of the Ia Drang began, the first major battle fought by the American Army in Vietnam. Over 3 harrowing days, vastly outnumbered American forces would hold out and ultimately repel enemy forces. American forces would never lose a major engagement during the ensuing 8 years of combat operations. Known as the Wall, the Vietnam Memorial stands in honor of those who served in the Vietnam War. The names of the men and women who gave their lives are inscribed in the order they were taken from us. 58,286 names. The youngest was Marine Private First Class Dan Bullock at 15 years of age, and the oldest was Navy Petty Officer First Class Kenna Taylor at 62. There are 3 sets of fathers and sons, 1 set of stepbrothers, 39 pairs of brothers, 8 women, 16 clergy, and 155 Medal of Honor recipients. And let us not forget, there are still more than 1,600 missing and unaccounted for personnel. The French were in Vietnam before the Americans and lost more than 70,000 lives. More than 400,000 Allied troops served with the American forces. Joining as allies with the United States were the Republic of Korea, Thailand, the Republic of the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. These allies suffered more than 5,000 lives lost during the course of the war. American combat forces left Vietnam in 1973. 2 years later, Saigon fell. Over those last 2 years, without American and Allied combat forces in the region, casualties in Southeast Asia were doubled what they had been during the 10 years prior. To our Vietnam veterans who answered the nation's call to serve, we thank you. Your greatness is etched in history from the battlefields of Southeast Asia to the neighborhoods of hometown America, where you continue to bring blessings and inspiration to your families and your country today. To the families of our Vietnam veterans, we thank you for the greatness of your support, sacrifice, vigilance, and compassion. And to our allies who stood by us 50 years ago, we thank you. The greatness that was earned by this generation never left you, and it never will.
At this time, if I could have the Vietnam veterans who are here, or those who served during that era, to come forward, to give us the honor of presenting you with a Vietnam Medal thing. How about a round of applause for you?
Thank you, Colonel McClinney, so much. We appreciate it.
My honor.
So
Our
much.
honor.
Thank you.
all. Thank you all so very much.
Okay, now we are ready to move on to our next topic. Thank you all so much for doing that, because we are very proud to be a commemorative partner, and I hope that this will reach some of you as well. So tonight we have a Vietnam veteran who has done something very interesting for the museum and for really the world. It's sort of it's an amazing collection that we have because of the work of a gentleman named Dr. Norman Rich. And I know that Dr. Norman Rich has some words to give to us today, but he also has some very interesting things to show us. This museum has, for several years, been in the process of accepting some really wonderful donations from Dr. Rich that we've added to our collection so that we could highlight how service members were affected by projectiles during the Vietnam War, maybe even looking at some weapons that were used, punji sticks, things that caused a lot of distress to our service members and many injuries. And these were things that he discovered very early needed to be studied more. So let me tell you a little bit about him as we're pulling some materials, and then I'm going to allow him, if he would please, to share a little bit about his collection that he donated to our museum with us, and then he has some words to share about the work that he did while he was in Vietnam. Dr. Norman Rich received both his BS and MD degrees at Stanford. Dr. Rich then served at the 2nd Surgical Hospital years later as chief of the Department of Surgery and at An Qui in the Republic of Vietnam from 1965 to 1966. He was professor of surgery of the School of Medicine at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, where he served and really retired not too long ago. Well, it's been a few years now. Is it 2002? Not that long ago. He's still around. He tells me he has his fingers in many pots. I don't think he's easy to get rid of. I'll put it that way. And they'd love to have him around. I told him when he came tonight that I was afraid the whole Norm Rich fan club would show up. So I know that there are some individuals in the audience who really have enjoyed working with him and learning from him for many, many years. So we're so glad that you came and joined us tonight. Dr. Rich has published over 300 manuscripts. He's worked for a very long time. I believe you worked for federal service for about 44 years, didn't you? It's a long time. He was able to co-author several books and authored books, including Vascular Trauma, which is one I think he's probably most well known for. His U.S. military awards include the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Award, and Vietnam medals. We're so thrilled that he could be here with us. It's very difficult to even do him justice, but when I think of him, I think of these fabulous things that he's given the museum and the stories that they tell, and we learn these things through him. So, Dr. Rich, if you don't mind, I want to also call attention to our collection managers. Alan Hawk and Amy Kim are with us. They care for these materials for Dr. Rich here at the museum, and so they have pulled a few special things that they thought he might like to show off tonight. So if you will, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. It's kind of coming home for me, if you will, because I lived here at Forest Glen for about 10 years. 5 years in the Spanish pavilion just down the road where the Indians in the front yard. And then I lived in the Swiss Chalet for about 5 years. So this is really home to me. Alan, again, you've been phenomenal in helping, and with your colleague, I appreciate it. Just to give you a little bit of background, I think I can go through a few slides and show you a little bit about why I got into this, if you will. I was a Boy Scout in a small Arizona copper mining town. There wasn't much to do growing up except be a Boy Scout and work for merit badges. So I became a collector and a Southwestern historian very early in life, so I was sort of primed, if you will. Also, when I went to Vietnam, I went on the Simon Bolivar Buckner III. Now, most of you don't realize that there were a number of us that went to Vietnam spending a whole month on the Pacific Ocean. So I had plenty of time to think about what I was going to do when I got to Vietnam and the projects and so forth. So in setting the stage here a little bit, I will show this disclaimer because the lawyers always want us to do that, and I do have an interest in many conflicts, and Vietnam happens to be one of them. Also, it's a walk down memory lane because in 1954, I worked at the Hoover Institute as part of my undergraduate studies. My mentor at that time gave me two choices. He said, "Rich, you have to do something unusual. You can either study Outer Mongolian Sanskrit, or you can do a thesis on Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist." And I could read German fairly well at that time, and knowing that there were original articles, I opted for the latter. But that prepared me and also gave me the opportunity to follow what many of my mentors had prepared me for. Otto Etzinger, World War I, he was the mining town surgeon, a great man, served in the French theater in 1917, 1918, and I kind of cut my teeth listening to him talk about it. I will admit, too, that he delivered me, so he would always say he had known me since my first breath. He's here with William Stewart Halstead at Johns Hopkins, class of 1914. There's Otto right there. They were cleaning bricks at Stanford after the 1906 earthquake. But one of his very good friends in the Stanford program was Emil Holman, the first chairman at Stanford, who was a William Stewart Halstead protege from Johns Hopkins, the surgical school, if you will, in the United States. And opposite Dr. Mattis of New Orleans is Michael E. DeBakey of Houston, the well-known cardiothoracic surgeon. So this was at the same time that I became influenced by these individuals in 1954. I did have an opportunity to reflect and go back to Stanford and give the Emil Holman lecture, which was a real thrill for me. And I just say a few things like this because when I talk to our students and talk to young people, I try to stress to them that there are all sorts of opportunities out there if we just seize upon them, and I was fortunate enough to have those opportunities. Dr. DeBakey was a loyal friend and supporter. He had been the 3rd surgical consultant for the Army at the end of World War II and stayed on an extra year to show the loyalty that existed in that generation. Last October, I gave the Excelsior Surgical Society lecture named for Edward D. Churchill of Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. DeBakey is standing right over here. Dr. Matheson, who I'll talk about more, is right there. Charles Robb of the British Army, who joined us later, is right here. Again, the Excelsior Surgical Society is noted by our college each year because of their contributions. In San Francisco, trauma, unfortunately, was quite prevalent. Dr. Elowesser was one of the senior traumatologists, if you will. Dr. Matheson was trained by him and was in World War II and was my mentor related to all of that. Dr. Blaisdell was trained by Dr. Matheson, and this, again, shows how all of this kind of weaves together. Hippocrates said something like this, supposedly, if you want to be a surgeon, follow an army. I certainly am one very well-trained young surgeon who did that, and the experience that I had in Vietnam was absolutely second to none. Unfortunately, because of the situation, you might say. I'm making a few observations. I always like to look at a little bit of history. William Beaumont made some important gastric physiology observations. Walter Reed, you know, with the Yellow Fever Commission, made some very important observations, but I doubt any of you have ever heard of James DeWolf, Army surgeon, Major James DeWolf. He made this observation on the 21st of June, 1876. I think it is very clear that we shall not see an Indian this summer. This was 4 days before the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And you know what happened to General Custer and everybody, including Major James DeWolf. So I like to cite this and say I hope that I'm not stepping too far out of my area of expertise in talking to you tonight. Through the helicopter, this is what it looked like as we entered Three Canopy Jungle in the central highlands of the Republic of Vietnam. None of us had ever really seen jungle like that. We did have Agent Orange poured all over us repeatedly to clear the cover, and that's another story. Also, you heard mention the Ia Drang Valley. We arrived when that started, but our hospital was still on board ship. They couldn't get it off unloaded, so I did work with the clearing company for the 1st Air Cavalry Division until we were able to get our hospital set up. Also, during that time, I outlined my numerous projects. I had a copy of the wound ballistics book from the Army Surgeon General's office. This is World War II Korean ballistics. And growing up in Arizona, I knew something about guns, if you will, but I knew I had to learn a lot more. So I made friends of individuals in the ordnance on base and told them of my interest and told them that I wanted to find out about the wounding power of various missiles. Also, the command, the 2-star general at that time, came to me very early on and he said, we have a big problem because we do have some friendly fire and we want to know what type of weapons cause the wounds. So we got into a little bit of sleuthing, if you will, and that also added to the intrigue of what I was doing. These are just some of the things that are thrown at us and break into pieces. And Henry Shrapnel is for another era. I learned very early on from Pierre A. Fink, a Swiss pathologist at the AFIP, who I met before I went to Vietnam, and he educated me and said, shrapnel shells haven't been fired since 1915. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We didn't study helmets like this to say you shouldn't wear a helmet, but we did study the wounding power of various missiles again. And in our little operating room, in the Quonset hut like this, from the very beginning, we saved the fragments. I do want to show this too, because as we mix with other cultures and go to other parts of the world, we're often challenged. This was a 14-year-old Vietnamese girl with acute appendicitis that had been treated with acupuncture. Unfortunately, that doesn't treat acute appendicitis. She had ruptured and had peritonitis, and if we hadn't operated on her, she really would have died. That's what it boils down to. So it was sort of an education on the side, you might say. From the very beginning, I thought, with a little bit of help from the top sergeant we had, and looking at the crates that you see here, the top sergeant who had served in World War II high-graded these out of the general's quarters for me and got some varnish, and so we had a setup, and that added to our museum. Now, the other thing I would say from the beginning, we collected almost everything that people brought us, and there wasn't a wounded person who didn't voluntarily donate his missile or his bullet to me for the studies. And I kept thinking to myself, man, if I was shot with a low velocity 22 caliber bullet, I'd mount it and put it on my mantle. I wouldn't give it to anybody. But this was important, and because we were so remote and because evacuation was so difficult, about 2/3 of the patients we operated on were held there and went back to duty in country. It was 1965, early 1966. Again, a different war, then developed a little bit later. But people would come in, and somebody would come and say, that's a bullet that got me in the hip. And somebody would say, oh, that's not so big. Let me show you my bullet or my fragment. So we had a lot of fun with that and a lot of camaraderie. Before I went to Vietnam, then Colonel, later Major General Carl W. Hughes, who had been in Korea, told me I should get in touch with Major General Bloomberg, who was the director of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and volunteer to bring everything that I could collect back to him. And of course, I got the green light, and he said, fantastic, do that. I'll give you a little bit more of that story in just a moment. But in our museum, we did try to document things. You can see the mortar. We had these land in our area a number of times, and this is the tail fin of one of those 60 millimeter mortars that was in our area. Typical fragments, and this is the type of wound that's difficult to treat sometimes. Various types of grenades. The enemy was very ingenious. They were going to our dump and taking the sea ration cans and putting explosive material in them and then throwing those at our troops. And we said it's bad enough to have to eat that stuff, if you will, but when the enemy throws the can back at you, that's too much. And that's exactly what it was. Along the line, I had been in Vietnam about 8 months, and I got orders from Lieutenant General Leonard D. Heaton to come to the American Medical Association in Chicago and give a report. Well, I again stress that and tell our students that too, because that was one of the bennies, if you will, of doing all the work that I'd done up to that point. Now, I did go 32,000 miles in 8 days, and it was really a whirlwind, and I did have to go back to Vietnam, but I did take these through customs, and you could imagine today we wouldn't have been allowed, but the 10th Ordnance people gave me a list of everything I had, and they certified everything was deactivated, so I didn't have any trouble getting things through. The punji stick was particularly of interest to us in our area. This goes back to Punjab, India, 2,500 years ago, and what impressed us is that this very low-cost weapon, if you will, put many of our troops out of duty about as long as some of the fragment wounds. We had 242 punji stick wounds of every part of the anatomy that you could imagine, and that did result in a report when we got back. This was published in one of the most prestigious surgical journals, and when people asked me if I ever was able to get anything in this journal, I said, yeah, our punji stick article, which was a great boon. Now, in the midst of all of this, I got a letter from my mother, and she said, your father and I have been trying to determine whether or not we should go to the Center to Goldwater to go to various people in Arizona, because we hear that they're going to put you in some kind of a mobile hospital and put you out in the middle of nowhere. You know, this is written up in time. This is something that was developed. We had the CH-54 helicopter that you can see, and the idea was that there would be an operating room here. When I raised the question, well, what do we do if we finish operating? What do we do with the patient? And they said, oh, we'll bring another one of these pods, and that can be your treatment room. I didn't want to be too naive, but I said, well, what if you put me out there and you don't have the friendly forces reach me? Well, we didn't get any further than that, and this never became a reality, but thank goodness I was able to go back to my museum collection. There were a few enjoyable moments. Bob Hope saw everybody. We didn't get a lot of people because it was so remote, but Bob Hope came. And Robert Mitchum showed up on his own and spent a couple of days with us, and it was fascinating talking to him. So again, even in difficult situations, there are many positive things that can happen. After I came back, I became part of a commission through the Department of State and the Department of Defense with people from East, West, Third World, revolutionary groups. We met repeatedly with the International Committee of the Red Cross, and part of our charge was to make wars more humane. Now, you know, what is an oxymoron? That's about the epitome of one, I think. We were able to at least address some of the concerns of various types of weapons being used and the wounding power of missiles. In 1972, the decision was made to stop conscription in the United States, which had started in 1940, as you know. Historians stressed to the military that doctors didn't flock to the military in times of relative peace. And you know, 1972, this was also the beginning of the Vietnam era of psychoses, if we can call it that. Anyway, the Uniformed Services University was started, and after 5 years of being the only surgeon there, I was able to talk a couple of World War II veterans into helping me, and Professor VD016 from the Mexican Military Medical Center. Dr. DeBakey always in the forefront, always with us, and always involved in what we're talking about. Dr. Burris, who was one of our 1982 graduates, developed an interest in wound ballistics, and unfortunately he had an early demise and his career was cut short. But he said something in 2005 that I really liked, because he said, "New wounds for new surgeons." And this is so true, because every time we go to war, we have to start all over again, if you will. So one of the things we're trying to do at the Uniformed Services is to prepare people to be a little bit more ready for the management of the injured patients. We have a number of meetings like this one 10 years, 11 years ago now, with colleagues from all over the world who come and share their thoughts with us. Vascular trauma has been mentioned. That is an ongoing Vietnam vascular registry. We're close to a 50-year follow-up right now, and we're combining this with the Global War on Terrorism vascular registry in San Antonio from Afghanistan and Iraq. Also, it's in the third edition that'll come out in June, and Dr. Colonel Todd Rasmussen is the chief author with a co-author from the United Kingdom, Colonel Nigel Tai. Dr. Spencer had been in Korea at the same time as General Carl Hughes, and he was a mentor and a good ally in all of this. I know you'll have a hard time really seeing this, but it says, what rank did you say it was when they have an eagle on each shoulder? One of my patients brought this to me. He drew this. But part of the interesting history of this is this retired colonel and I knew each other for about 8 years, and I had operated on him. So I'm in the clinic a number of times, and suddenly, 8 years later, if you will, he looked at me and he said, "We met in Ankei." And I said, "Holy cow, you're the colonel?" And he said, "Yes." He called me out of my rack about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he said, "We've just overrun a Viet Cong hospital." He said, "We're to turn all of this in," but he said, "I know you have this little museum." He said, "Anything you can cart off in the next hour, you can have." And I thanked him very much, but I thought that was a great story about how small the world is if we keep our eyes and ears open. The best part of the story I can give you in a quick summary. I was giving a lecture at the Sternberg Auditorium in 1968 at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. All of a sudden, I was surrounded by all these big men. They pulled me off the stage, and I said, "You know, I'm giving a lecture." And they said, "We don't care, you're in really deep trouble." And one of them said, "The only thing that we're trying to decide among ourselves is whether or not you should be court-martialed or you should be shot or sent to some remote island or whatever." Well, it was the CIA, the CID, the whatever else, FBI. They were all represented. And what they were after me for is the museum items that I had shipped out of Vietnam. Now, you know, how was I going to ship those things? How was I going to, particularly automatic weapons? I had an AK-47 assault rifle. I had a MAT 49 French from Dien Bien Phu, you know, a real collector's item. All of this was boxed up for me in Vietnamese teak or mahogany. I don't know my woods well enough to know what. But anyway, they got to McCord Air Force Base in the state of Washington, and I didn't know that, and nobody contacted me. They sat there for about a year, and somebody finally ran me down and said, "Send this to Major Rich at Walter Reed." Well, as the boxes started going across state lines, they said, "This Army major is shipping automatic weapons across state lines," and I mean, the charges were phenomenal. Well, anyway, the thing that saved my skin is that I did have a list of everything that I had cataloged, and I did have a letter from Major General Blumberg of the FIP saying, "Norman, I want all of that, give it to me." So it was a short-lived challenge, but it was a challenge. At the old Army Medical Museum, I don't know whether any of you were ever down on the mall when it was down there, but at that old museum, they did make an exhibit, and I just found these photographs that were given to me. They had a permanent Vietnam exhibit, but of course, the old Army Medical Museum was torn down a couple of years after this date of 1968. This is the plan of the exhibit that they had, and I hope I can find a better copy of that. Some of the Viet Cong copied medical books were intriguing because you wondered who spent so many hours copying things like this, but that's what they went by in their hospital. And I'm grateful to the staff here for working with me. I always, being a collector, said someday I'm going to get organized, and I'm trying very hard, realizing I don't have that much time left, and so I am grateful that we're able to get things over here, including the Montagnard crossbow, which was given to me by a couple of grateful patients. And actually, I treated 4 patients with arrow wounds, and being from Arizona, I was particularly interested in that type of experience, not that they were severe wounds or anything. This is a very rapid review, and I hope I left enough time to be able to answer a few questions or have you come up and look at what we have. I did unfortunately take some of this apart at one point to make a more formal exhibit, and some of it didn't get back where it's supposed to be, but most of it is held together. The Montagnard crossbow, the various booby traps, they were great in number. A Marine Corps colonel actually traveled halfway across South Vietnam, as it was known at that time, to bring me a booby trap for the museum. So the word was out, and all he could say to me is, Doc, try to make something good out of this horrible situation. So hopefully there is something good that's come out of it. I know our study of fragment wounds, wound ballistics, has been a great opportunity and a great teaching opportunity to pass on some of this information. So thank you very much for listening to my bouncing off the wall with all sorts of things, and I'll be glad to try to answer any questions. Thank you.